Chanakya University's fellowship program. Join us as we navigate the landscapes of social science through insightful conversations with the world's leading achievers, thought leaders, professionals, and academicians. Together, let us delve into the nuances of their fields, thus uncovering their wisdom. Where discourse meets discovery and knowledge fosters change. Stay tuned. Have you ever been subject to misunderstandings, conflict, or even lost opportunities because of poor communication? I'm sure all the 7.4 billion people in the world rely on effective communication strategies, both personal and professional. Today, we are lucky to have with us Professor Yudijith Bhattacharji, the author of a New York Times bestseller, a prolific writer, and an esteemed visiting professor here at Chanakya University. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you, sir. Professor Yudijith is an award-winning writer whose essays on espionage, cybercrime, science, and medicine have appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, Wired, and other American magazines. Professor Yudijith spent 11 years as a staff writer at the weekly journal Science, writing about neuroscience, astronomy, and a variety of topics in research and science policy. Firstly, thank you for taking the time to be with us here today, sir. I've listed a few pointed questions for you on the subject of communication. And needless to say, viewers of our podcast will greatly benefit from your wisdom.
Well, thank you so much, Sharanya. I'm honored that you chose to interview me for this podcast. I've been at Chanakya University now for almost 2 weeks. This is an amazing place. Not far from the Bangalore airport, a first-class, world-class university that's taking shape right in front of our eyes. There's several distinguished faculty members here. There's new buildings being built. This campus is going to look spectacular in just a few years. I can see that. And most importantly, the vision behind this university seems to have struck a chord with me and with many of you who are at the university. I've really enjoyed interacting with the fellows of the Chanakya Fellowship over these past 2 weeks. We've enjoyed our time together. I hope that I've been able to impart some wisdom, and I'm sure we'll be in touch beyond this visiting professorship. I've had a great time here.
Amazing. So to start off with, considering India's growing rank in the global hierarchy, what do you think is the role of Indian scholars in communicating and adding value to India's growing soft power?
I think Indian intellectuals, Indian scholars have a great responsibility today, greater than ever before, to try and promote Indian ideas, Indian scholarship, Indian science, Indian business. Given that India is now considered to be a rising world power, some might argue that India has risen already. India has been rising for the last 30 years, and certainly in the last 10 years, the country's economy has prospered to the extent that India is now a major power. It has a seat at the table. India's a big influencer when it comes to world events. Now, that kind of power doesn't come from the government alone. It doesn't come from the military alone. It comes from India's vibrant culture. It comes from India's intellect. It comes from India's ancient wisdom. It comes from India's youth, like all of you guys here at Chanakya. And it's clear that Indians are going to be expected to contribute their ideas more and more to solving big world problems like climate change. And the only way to take leadership in that space is to be able to communicate effectively. to have original voices from this country that make a mark internationally. Now, don't get me wrong, India's made a mark over the decades. Indian scholars are admired throughout the world, so it's not like none of this has happened before. But I think the scale at which we're now expected to make a dent in international affairs is much bigger than it used to be. And so, to all of India's young students who are now coming up through universities like Chanakya, I say, learn to write better, learn to communicate better, because those skills will not only help you, but they will also help this country.
Absolutely, sir. So you mentioned about retaining originality, which brings me to my next question. Considering India is home to thousands of dialects and thousands of languages, are non-English speaking scholars handicapped in presenting their views to a global audience?
It's funny, that's a question that I've actually thought about a lot. In my life as a science writer, I've often interviewed people with subject matter expertise. And that subject matter expertise need not be expertise in communication, obviously, because I'm supposed to be the communications expert in that interaction. The point I'm trying to make is that ultimately the content of your knowledge is very important, and that is what determines how much respect you earn, or at least that is what should determine how much respect you earn. In all of my years as a journalist, I've interviewed many scholars in India and overseas, in parts of the world that are not native English-speaking countries. I mean, India actually has a tradition of English. I mean, English is one of India's languages. But even so, what I'm trying to say is that I've come across several experts who don't speak fluent English, but are actually able to communicate their ideas very clearly, articulately, with lots of power and credibility, despite not being completely conversant in American or British English. So don't let that deter you at all, because the strength of ideas is more powerful than language itself. However, it helps if you can speak fluently. It helps if you can organize your thoughts clearly. It doesn't matter if you speak slowly. It doesn't matter if you're not using idiom that resonates with an American audience. Those are not essential. What's essential is clarity. What's essential is, cogent thoughts. What's essential is not repeating yourself and not boring your audience to death. What's important is having an engaging style of presentation. And so remember that language is just one factor in that entire mix. And the more you kind of keep that in mind, the more comfortable you'll be doing public speaking, writing memos to your boss, and so on. So I just want to emphasize that Indian intellectuals have a lot to offer. They have a lot to share, even the ones who might be hesitant in English.
I think that's a very powerful thought on how clarity takes precedence over grammar and intricacies of the language. Just another thought. I believe that very often the emotion of what we want to say in our regional language is lost out when we translate it. So how can this be overcome for non-English speaking scholars?
That's a great question. Of course, if I, when I watch these Netflix shows, for instance, if I watch a show that was originally made in Hindi, and if I decide to switch to the English version, it often doesn't make enough sense. Or even if it does, I'm getting the basic facts. But I know that when I listen to the show in Hindi, it resonates with me, it moves me in ways that the English version, the English audio version, doesn't. I don't think there's an easy answer to that question because languages are unique. They are repositories of culture and thought and custom and emotion. And so those sentiments, even though there's some universality to them, you might have to try harder. You might have to understand the perspective of your listener in order to do what's known as code switching. There's this term called code switching where, you come from one world, but you're dealing with people who are coming from another world. And you code switch in order to bridge that divide. And I think that requires more familiarity and more understanding of the audience that you're speaking to.
Right. That's a wonderful thought, sir. What would be your suggestion to budding Indian scholars like us to inculcate effective communication abilities without resorting to the English hegemony?
Well, I think first of all, young people should read more. The more you read and the more diverse you're reading, read Indian authors, read Western authors, read Chinese authors. Find every kind of author to read, but make it a habit. I think that would be my first piece of advice. And when you're reading, observe the different styles of writing. Don't just read blindly, but of course you're reading for content, you're reading for ideas, but along the way, take a moment to reflect on how the author has communicated those ideas. The other thing to do is, maybe to listen to podcasts, such as this one. But really, I'm not being facetious. There is a wealth of podcasts now out there that are available for free. And many of these podcasts deal with ideas, they deal with international relations, they deal with sociology, psychology. Every topic under the sun is now covered through podcasts in which prominent speakers and prominent thinkers share their ideas. I think listening to those, making a habit to listen to those, will also improve the fluency and the confidence with which you can discuss your own ideas. So those are just a couple of pieces of advice.
That's great. But just a follow-up question. So considering the barrage of information that's thrown at us every day through Instagram and X and LinkedIn and everything else, how would you suggest we filter out what's really relevant to improving and honing our communication abilities as opposed to watching something or reading something for the content?
Well, there's no easy answer. Again, you're asking me all the tough questions, and I'm struggling with this myself. I find myself scrolling through reels all the time. It's become an addiction, a compulsive habit, and it's certainly not good for my brain. But the least I can do is maybe stop watching like really idiotic things. Like the other day, I clicked on something. It was a Komodo dragon eating a monkey. It was actually a very sad video. But, I was hooked and I kept watching it. And of course, before I knew it, the next few days, my Facebook feed kept showing me videos like that. So I think resisting the impulse to click on an Insta reel of that nature or something that's really garbage might be at least the first step.
Right.
So I also love music, and I click on many like songs of Hariharan or, of these greats. And then my feed is populated by really good stuff. And I feel like my brain is getting good nourishment.
Right.
But in the realm of ideas, I think there are many good reels that perhaps you could watch. And if you make a habit to click on those, and avoid the ones that are garbage, then I think then the system, then all of these social media platforms will probably suggest
Right.
a better diet and make you healthier.
Sure. I'm sure we'll all be trying that out very soon. So just a few minutes ago, we spoke about how the right time is now to project India in the right light on the global platform. But it's important to keep in mind that pride must be balanced with objectivity as well. So how can scholars ensure that their communication celebrates India's achievements while still maintaining academic integrity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that in this moment, we are grappling with this problem where because of this nationalistic fervor that is currently in the air in India, it's both a good moment and in some ways, it's a troubling moment because we need to be more objective when we're making claims about our ancient wisdom, about our strengths. And every claim that we make needs to be well researched and founded upon true scholarship. And I worry that in many instances that is not happening. And so the people who might be promoting ideas or half-baked claims are actually doing a grave injustice to the legacy of Indian knowledge systems because it starts to erode our credibility. If I start throwing out claims like 3,000 years ago we knew how to cure cancer, and I make it go viral on WhatsApp, it makes people feel good in that moment. Yeah. People who are receiving it feel like, wow, look at that. But really it doesn't mean anything. And people who are knowledgeable about cancer, I just made up that example, guys. Maybe it's true that we knew how to cure cancer 3,000 years ago, but I think it's important for me to be convinced that that particular piece of knowledge or that claim comes from something that's well researched and something that I can look up and trust. So I think we need to be careful in making claims because we're maturing as a country. We're a responsible world power, and we need to be smarter in how we present ourselves. And that requires not making wild assertions simply because there's 50 of us making the assertion. So, just the strength of numbers. I mean, these days you can put something out as a tweet, and if it gets thousands of likes, people think, well, that must be true because are thousands of people stupid? Well, of course, thousands of people can be stupid. I mean, there's no doubt. So our criteria for judging what is credible, what is true, needs to be tightened. And I think there needs to be some uniformity. And I think that educational institutions like Chanakya need to be promoting those values of critical thinking, looking inward, not just looking at the rest of the world. I mean, the same thing would apply to assessing claims made by other countries, by scholars in other countries or businesses in other countries. So that's just a thought.
That's interesting. But to counter that, on the other hand, don't you think there are so many actual discoveries and inventions that were made by ancient Indians that have not received the visibility that they deserve? And so many people, our own Indian people, are not aware of our own heritage and culture. So, I mean, there are both sides to the same coin. So where do we draw the line between pride and also retaining our...
I completely agree that India's ancient wisdom and India's knowledge systems of the past probably have several, like just a vast wealth of treasures that are unknown even to us in India because they've just never received the attention that they deserve. But I think we should come to we should come to a consensus about how to draw attention to those to those accomplishments of the past. I think that scholars need to write papers, write books. They need to put out actual evidence that shows clearly what the accomplishments were. Those accomplishments should be well defined. And I think when that happens, we're going to earn a lot more credibility.
Right.
So, of course, there's a tremendous amount of work that's waiting to be done. But I think we can't sort of leapfrog ahead in that movement to simply making the claim and imagining that it must be true.
Right.
We have to go through the hard work of, producing the documentary evidence, translating, the treatises, or the manuscripts of old, and then interpreting them accurately. So if there's a shloka maybe from years ago, that something that conveys like, breathe fresh air and you will feel refreshed. You can't say like, see, they used to, they had pandemics like COVID in the past, and they knew already, 2,000 years ago, that being out in the open prevents transmission of COVID. You see what I'm saying? That you can make a claim like that and say that claim is based on that shloka, but nobody would take that seriously, right? So you have to do the hard work of the research in order to showcase the actual accomplishments.
Right. That's very interesting. Just sharing another anecdote. So yoga in itself is also very Indian and it does stem from the Indian origin. But because it's being so globalized now, we see very often that it's being stripped of its origin and its nationality and being given different names and different identities world over. So how would you suggest we reclaim this identity of India?
Well, this is where my instinct as a journalist kicks in. I always find that, more detail is what helps to reclaim something as your own. So because there's a vast literature on yoga here, and there are so many knowledgeable yoga gurus in this country, I think that showcasing the different types of yoga, showcasing the science and the theory behind various postures and practices, and doing that in a systematic way, drawing more public attention to it, making documentaries, really slick documentaries, which are going to find a market all over the world, on German TV, Dutch TV. We have so much to offer, but we need to do it right. We need to have people who are effective communicators, who are good filmmakers. I mean, we have amazing talent in this country. Every day, it's mind-blowing, the depth of talent. 1.4 billion people. I mean, it's just a treasure. It's just incredible. And I'm saying that with full sincerity, that I think that we could make, films, we could make, we could have launch like a global yoga magazine from this country, from Bangalore. Create a startup that launches that magazine. There'll be no dearth of advertising from around the world. And then have like a really good website to go with that. Make Insta Reels from that magazine and then push it out. Use some marketing money to create that brand. That's just one idea. You don't have to take it in that direction. You could have the world's biggest yoga institute, in Ayodhya, for instance. I just said Ayodhya because it's been in the news lately, but you could have it anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in the country. So those are just some ways in which, you can reclaim what is your own.
Right. So that's very interesting, and we have a lot of thinking to do along these lines. Coming to my last question for today's episode, would you suggest some tips and tricks to exponentially increase our communication skills?
Well, I don't know if it's going to be exponential, but yeah, I think just reading more, not worrying about how you sound, because I do think that that is an impediment to a lot of young Indian students. They have a hang up because of the language, because they didn't grow up speaking the language at home. They only used it in an academic context. They worry if they have the fluency needed to communicate effectively. But if they shed that inhibition,
Right.
and if they take some risks, but if they actually also listen to themselves, if they listen to the podcasts, if they pay attention to how they're sounding only after the fact. I mean, they must review how they're doing, but I'm saying while they're communicating, they should feel freer, right? I think that would be one suggestion, because ultimately, if you're listening to the right stuff, if you're reading enough, all of that will straighten out. It'll straighten itself out, because for young people, their brains are still, being molded. They're not fully developed yet. Especially teenagers and people to some extent in their undergraduate years are still forming. So young people have tremendous plasticity,
Right.
and they should apply that to becoming more comfortable in communicating. And then, what about communicating in the regional languages? I mean, you think that all Kannadigas just by default are very articulate in Kannada? I don't think so. I mean, there must be like people who are Kannadigas who might tell you a story in Kannada and you're like, wait, you've got it all wrong. You told me the end in the beginning and the beginning at the end, etc., etc. So like I said, the organization, the clarity of your thought is really what I would like to emphasize rather than the language.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir, for this very insightful, very interesting conversation today. If there's one thing that I'll always remember, it's more than the intricacies of the language, it's the clarity of thought that matters, and connecting with the audience as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's been a real pleasure to be at Chanakya University. I wish the university great success, and all of you fellows, you will go on to do amazing things. I'm sure of it.
Thank
So
you,
I
sir.
hope that we can stay in touch.
Absolutely. And to all our viewers watching, we urge you to please go check out sir's work as well and join us for the next episode. Thank you.